Good evening and welcome to our Resilient Parenting Support Group for all parents from all walks of life, learning techniques and strategies of how to teach our children to be self-confident, to have self-esteem, and to be resilient. This will also help us not burn out at the same time. Until now, we've been discussing different ways to manage our children, to get them to cooperate, giving them emotional support, getting them not to fight, conflict resolution. This is called management. When our children are from the age of 0 to 12, let's say 12 or 13, we are called upon to be micromanagers. When they're small, it's a lot of micromanagement, getting dressed, feeding them, preparing them for school, washing their clothes, washing their hair, bath time, moving them along, a lot of micromanagement, a lot of pressure, getting them dressed, changing their clothes, changing diapers, a lot of pressure on us, micromanagement. As they get older and they can get dressed for themselves from the age of 5, 6, and 7 onward till 12, then we are less micromanaging, but we are still managers. When the children turn 12 and 13 and 14 and become teenagers, then our role changes. Very hard for us to let go of that management role because we feel that we're responsible for them to get it right. But the role does change, and it's better for us and for the child if we take on a new role when they become teenagers, and that's called consultant. We become consultants where we advise when they ask for advice, we encourage, we motivate, but we don't micromanage anymore. Very hard for us as parents to make that shift. And it comes from bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, to make that shift. They become a man or a woman, they become responsible in mitzvos. And therefore, we should also recognize that, not only in halachic terms, not only in terms of Jewish law, but also spiritually and emotionally. Give them more responsibility. After all, they are now responsible for their own lives. They're responsible for their own mitzvos and averos. So therefore, we have an obligation to shift our mindset and our behavioral pattern to treat them as consultees or clients as opposed to micromanage menchies, little things and pawns to move around on a chessboard. Simultaneous with that, if we're going to teach our children to become independent players and not to become dependent on us in their teenage years as they move toward training toward becoming married, and when they're married, they have to fly solo with their spouse and make it on their own. If we don't teach them independence, they're not going to be able to go away from home. That's why we send kids to camp and sleepaway camp when they're 13, 14, 15, because they have to get used to being away from home. And children, when they get married, if it's the first time they're away from home and they go for their spouse, it's too much of an overpowering shock for them to say, I have to go away from my mom and dad. I have to make my life for myself. If they never had a sleepover, they never had a camp experience, they never went away for a Shabbaton, never went away to a retreat, never went away to grandparents' house and spent time away from mom and dad, they become dependent on us. So we need to train them to become independent players, to become successful and make their own decisions. That's actually a badge of success. Very hard for us to let go. You know, my son just got married in January, Baruch Hashem, and they came for Shabbos, Friday night. The young couple came for Friday night. And as they were leaving, they said, thanks for having us. I said, yeah, thanks for having you in your own home. It was very hard for me. Like, bye, good night, good Shabbos, thanks for coming. I go, well, thanks for coming to your own house. You just slept here 6 weeks ago and now you have your own house. Goodbye. Like, it's hard for me to let them go. And yet, that's what we daven for. That's what we dream about. Let them go off and make their own lives, set up their own Torah home. But psychologically and emotionally, as us as parents, it's very hard for us to let go. So if we're going to start doing it only when they're 22, that's too late. We have to start doing it when they're 13, 14, 15 and teach them independence. But actually, it's not true. We have to start teaching them independence and making their own choices and not becoming dependent upon us while we're managing them when they're children. While they're 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. While we're managing, we have to throw in streaks and teaching them a mahalach, a pathway of independence, of making their own decisions, that they have a right to make their own decisions in certain cases. By being governed by our framework and our rules of protection and guidance. And yet we have to give them some wiggle room and some room. You have to give them some room to maneuver and operate, because otherwise they're not going to be able to start making their own decisions when they're teenagers, and for certain not be able to make them when they get married. So I want to share some examples tonight on our screen, the sharing of the screen, of 6 different examples of how we can use techniques to foster independence. So the first technique is called let children make choices. We have small children here in these illustrations, not teenagers, but small children. And even at a young age of 3, 4, 5, we are fostering independence by letting them make a choice between 2 options. Both options we can live with, but we're teaching them that they have an opportunity, they have a right, perhaps even an obligation to make a choice. So, Rachel, can you share with us the role plays on this first scenario and strategy of letting children make choices? Please go ahead.
Are you in the mood for your gray pants or your red pants? Would you like half a glass of juice or a whole? We're leaving in 5 minutes. Do you want to go to the slide one more time or on the swing? What would work best for you? Doing your practice before or after dinner?
So in each one of these cases, we're giving the child a choice: gray pants, red pants, glass, half a glass, full glass, the swing or the slide, before dinner, after dinner. We can live with any of these choices the child makes, but we're making the child aware of the fact that they have the power of choice. Very important principle of, in Hebrew, as we call it, bechira chofshis, free will. Now, free will does not mean, really, free will does not mean, should I go buy the red pants, get the red pants or the blue pants? That's not really free will. Free will in Jewish thought really means making a free will moral choice. Should I steal or not steal? Should I speak Lashon Hara or not speak Lashon Hara? Should I say that negative thing to my spouse or not say that negative thing? That's called free will. Free will in the moral sphere, whether I do something right or wrong, that's free will. Free will does not really mean, should I go on the swing or the slide? Should I do my work before dinner or after dinner? Free will can include the idea of, should I listen to my parents or not listen to my parents? Should I cooperate or not cooperate? The general sphere of teaching our children to cooperate is part of free will. But should I choose red pants or blue pants? That's not free will. But the overall idea of giving a child the concept that they have the obligation or the opportunity to make a choice is a very novel thing. It's a very shocking thing for a child. And when we tell them that they can choose, I could choose. So there are choices that a child can make in its decisions. And it'd be very hard to be an adult who is forced to make decisions about career, lifestyle, who to marry, without having had a good deal of experience in exercising your own judgment. So we're training our children to make choices in marriage and in career and in adulthood and what they want to do for a living when they turn 19, 18, 17, 20, while they're 3 and 4. We do this in kindergarten when the little girl plays the mommy for the Shabbos table, and the boy plays the tati, the daddy, and we have the father makes the little boy at 4 years old makes kiddush, and the little girl makes challah, and the little girl makes challah and she lights the candles. So at a very young age, we have a tradition in our schools and in our Jewish tradition to train children to be, one day you're going to be a mommy. One day you're going to be a daddy. But that's very significant. We're teaching them from a very young age that they are being prepared at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 to one day set up a home of their own. So therefore, we have to let our psychological, educational chinuch training catch up with that game we play about playing Shabbos Tati and Shabbos Mommy by actually giving them choices to foster independence. Let's move on to the next example of a different type of technique. This is called showing respect for a child's struggle. Let's try that one. Instead of,
here, give me the jar, sweetheart. Show respect. A jar can be hard to open. Sometimes it helps if you tap the lid with a spoon.
Here the mother is trying to swoop in and save the child from the struggle. After all, the child may drop the jar and it'll break all over the floor. I'm trying to protect myself, actually, from having to clean up a broken glass mess. The child drops it or hurts their hand. But actually, giving guidance by it's easier to do it with a spoon gives a child a sense of independence. This is a different technique where you respect the child's struggle, not swoop down and solve the struggle. Very hard, and I have to admit myself that I try to help my children with their homework and with their papers because I don't want to see them suffer because I can write better than they do, more experience, and therefore I help them with their papers. But I shouldn't be doing that. And recently, there was one paper that my daughter did, which I helped her with. She got an 83 in the paper. So after the 83, I said, let me call her. I think I deserve a 90. I think you deserve a 93 on that paper because that was a really good paper. So I got too involved. And when it comes to papers, I get too involved with my children. And that's not the right thing to do because they're not going to learn to become independent players and they're not going to be able to write for themselves. Now, after time, seeing how I work together on these papers with them and editing them, etc., so they've learned it over time. But that's not the optimum way. So I should not be swooping in. So that I am guilty of this as well. And I have to learn to become stepping back, letting them make their own papers, make their own B or C rather than a B plus or an A, because that's the learning process. But I too find it very difficult to let go. And therefore this strikes very much home to myself. Let's try the next example, Rachel.
Instead of, what's taking you so long? Show respect. Tying shoelaces takes a lot of fancy finger work.
Now, this one is very, very important because what's taking so long is a put down, criticism. It puts the child under pressure. You're not good enough. Now, if we do this a number of times a day, hurry up, don't spill the milk, let's get going, come on, hurry up, take a shower, do your homework. How many such comments do we make per day to get a child to move along, to keep our ship running? So I once asked my Psych 101 class, 12th graders at Benos Yisrael, the question, how many times do parents make these kinds of encouraging, motivating statements like, what's taking so long? Hurry up, pick up the towel, Shabbos is coming, make your lunch, go to bed, turn off the light, don't spill the milk. How many comments like that are there per day? So one girl said, impossible to count. It's a constant stream of such comments. Now, how many, let's say, are there per day? Let's make a conservative guess. Let's say there are 10 per day. Very conservative number. I think they're more like 30, but let's say there are 10. So 10 times 7 days a week is 70. 70 in 1 week. Times 50 weeks is 3,500 per year. Times 10, when the child is 10 years old, that's 35,000 encouraging comments like, what's taking so long? Hurry up, pick up the towel, brush your teeth, clean up the floor. How many times do we say that by the time the child is 10? That's 35,000. And that's a conservative number based on 10 per day. I think the number is more like 30 per day, which would make the number over 100,000 such comments by the time a child is 10 years old. We're talking a long time. We're talking a lot of comments. And when a child comes into my office, or the parents bring the child into my office saying, Rabbi, my child has low self-esteem, fix my child, I say, let's have family therapy. Let's have a family group, because I don't see a child by themselves. I like to see the family together, because I want to work together with the family to help them understand that we work this as a family, and we have to be positive and encouraging independence with children, and not negative. So let's try with a third one instead of the bottom one. And let me just move the screen down. Instead of
adding fractions is a snap. I'll help you. Show respect. Adding fractions can be hard. It's not easy to find the common denominator.
the child's struggle is respected, he or she gathers courage to see the job through by himself or herself. A very important principle here that my mentor and Rebbe, Rabbi Twersky, would often say is that we have to allow the child the room to have self-esteem. Self-esteem means to make their own decisions and to make their own mistakes. They learn from their mistakes. So if we tell the child or hint to the child, there's a common denominator, common denominator. Don't do the problem for them, but show them a methodology of solving the problem and let them work it out by themselves, because only with a sense of effort and accomplishment is self-esteem earned. And I have to remember that when I do my papers or do the papers with my children. And should I be honest? When I do the papers for my children, which is not right, I have to learn that giving them an independence of doing it on their own. And now my daughter this semester has started saying, Abba, it's okay, I can do the paper on my own. Even though it's not as stylistic and even though it's not as good as what I would do, because I'm a professional writer, nevertheless, and have been through a lot of writing courses, nevertheless, she said, I got the same grade as you. I got the same grade that we got when we did it together. I said, really? Oh, so I'll have to have a word with that. No, I'm not going to have a word with the teacher or professor. I'm just going to say, great. So she's learning to be independent. She doesn't want the help anymore. She knows she wants to express her own independence. So here too, expressing respect for a child's ability to make their own decision or to put in their own effort or to figure out things by themselves is crucial for their own sense of esteem, self-respect, and ability to have free self-esteem and free will. Let's go on to the next example. Another technique. And this technique is called don't ask too many questions, which we do a lot of. Instead of,
how did your teacher like your composition? Did you pass the math test? Is anyone coming over after school to play with you today? No? Why not? Hi, I'm glad to see you.
big difference than all those interrogative questions, cross-examination, to glad to see you, open-ended. Try again.
Instead of, did you have a good time at the party? Who was there? Were people dressed up? What did you have to eat? Was there dancing? Did you dance? With whom? Welcome home.
I'm just thinking how I feel when I hear those questions, when the parent is asking all these questions. I am feeling myself personally, when I'm listening to this as a parent, as an adult, claustrophobic. I'm feeling like, oh, like I'm being choked with all these questions. Like I want to duck under the barrage of all these questions. I just walked in the door. Give me a second to sit down. Let me share with you. So the open-ended option of welcome home, how are you? How you doing? How was it? Right? Allows independence, allows freedom, allows, and it fosters a sense of, I trust you that you can share with me what needs to be shared with me, as opposed to cross-examining because I want to know every move you made and I want to monitor. Now, this is very hard for us because we feel we have to micromanage. But these children in this picture are teenagers, 15, 16, 18 years old. We cannot micromanage as we did when they were 3 and 7 and 5. So this is a perfect example of a teenager, and the parent must take on a role of consultancy. Welcome home. How are you doing? They got a problem. They'll tell me about it. And I have to resist, show self-control to resist the urge to micromanage and to find out what's happening so I can control it, so I can make sure everything's safe. I have to be more of a consultant, and that leads to greater independence and free will. Example of number 4, don't rush to answer questions. Instead of,
Daddy, where does rain come from?
Rain is caused by evaporation and condensation of moisture. See, what actually happens is,
so the child is listening, but it's claustrophobic. Let's try a different one.
Daddy, where does rain come from?
that's an interesting question. What do you think?
Like, I don't know. What do I think? I don't know. Well, what do you think? When the father asks that question, where do you think? What is he saying to the child? He's saying, I trust you have a brain, you have an imagination, you can figure out things, I'll help you. But it's actually counterintuitive and shocking for a parent to say, what do you think? What's your opinion? And it's very, very valuable for a parent to say to a child, what do you think about the situation in Israel? What do you think about COVID-19 vaccines? What do you think about lockdowns? What do you think about shutting down schools? What's your opinion? Oh, well, my opinion, I don't have an opinion. Well, you're allowed to have an opinion. And I think you're smart enough to have an opinion. What do you think? You can start them off, but foster the idea that they can have an opinion. Let's try another one.
Why does Grandma visit us every week?
Because she loves us so much and because she lives nearby and
we're trying to protect Grandma, and we're trying to protect ourselves for allowing Grandma to come, instead of allowing the child to wonder about this question and show respect by doing the following.
Why does Grandma visit us every week?
you wonder about that. Why does Grandma visit us every week?
So if you say it that way, what happens? Anyone in our group can answer that question? What happens when we allow the child, without answering the question, throwing it back to the child? What does it say to the child about asking the child to think about an answer? What does that do for the child?
Maybe it empowers the child to feel like he or she is important enough to be asked that question.
Yes, I love that idea. Empowered and important enough to be asked that question and to have their own opinion. That's excellent. How about this? This is a new one. Encourage number 5. Encourage children to use sources outside the home. Let's try this one.
Dad, my angelfish looks sick. What should I do?
I wonder if the pet shop owner has any suggestions.
All my friends are allowed to have gum. Can you buy me gum?
Let's check with the dentist and see what he thinks about chewing gum.
Mom, did you find me a guitar teacher yet?
I'm still making inquiries. I'd also like you to ask around school for some recommendations.
Dad, you've got to help me with math. I'm so behind.
How would you feel about asking the teacher for the name of a senior who would tutor you just until you caught up?
So we want to know, the bottom of it says, we want our children to know that they are not completely dependent on us. The world outside the home, and it takes a village to raise a family and raise a child. The pet shop, the dentist, the school, the doctor, an older child, school counselor can all be called upon to help them with their questions and their struggles. And when a child asks questions, they deserve the chance to explore answers for themselves. So here we have a research project. Well, why don't you do some research about what kind of guitar lessons are out there, or what kind of after-school activities you'd be interested in, rather than relying upon me. Here, again, this is the childhood fostering of independence. Here we're talking about teenagers and giving them the obligation and the right and the opportunity to figure out things on their own. The sixth technique is a very important one called Don't Take Away Hope. Again, a variation on the theme of fostering independence and a child's ability to dream. Let's try this one.
Mom, I'm trying out for the lead in the school play. Do you think I'll get the part?
I don't want you to be disappointed. Why try for the lead when you haven't had any acting experience? Maybe there's a smaller part. So instead of that, let them explore an experience. So you're going to try out for the lead. That should be an experience.
So what if they fail? What if they don't get chosen? There's only one child who's going to get chosen for the lead, and there are 12 kids trying out. So 11 kids are going to be disappointed. We're trying to protect the child from being disappointed and not making the team, or not making the choice, or not making the grade. I think it's important for a child to know they're not always going to win. They're not always going to make it. And that's what life shows us. Life knocks us down when we get out in the real world. And if we keep them in a bubble and we make them think that they're always going to be successful and they're always the star, they're going to be in for a lunch bag letdown, because they're going to get to the real world and find out that they're not a star. They're competing with, in their classroom in local Oshkosh, Wisconsin, they're number one in the class. But when they get to university or they get to master's level, right, they find out that there's all the Oshkosh top children are in competition with them, and they're competing for grades and competing for jobs. They're not going to be the only one. So preparing them for competition is really important. And we have to resist the temptation of trying to protect our children and save them from disappointment. Let's try the next example.
I want to get a job babysitting.
You're much too young, dear. No one will hire you.
Instead of that, try something else.
You think you might like to work as a sitter? Tell me about it.
Here, we're letting the child come up with ideas of why she feels responsible enough to be a babysitter. And maybe they'll figure out that maybe I should wait till I'm 13 or 12, or start practicing at our house first with the little children. But let them figure out things on their own. The next one.
Maybe I'll be an engineer when I grow up.
With your math grades, forget it.
Devastating. Devastating. That child will never forget that comment, that put down. That put down will be etched in their soul forever. With your brains, with your math brains, you're never gonna. And that child will be hurt the rest of their life because of that comment. Let's try something else.
So you're considering a career in engineering?
Yeah. So by protecting a child from disappointment, we protect them from hoping, striving, dreaming, and sometimes from achieving their own dreams. So in these examples, we have a struggle, an internal struggle within ourselves. We want to protect the child. We want the child to be safe. the same time, we want to teach the child to be independent. And we want to rush in and protect and save the child from the struggle of turning open the can or the jar of peanuts or the peanut butter or the Coke bottle. At the same time, we want to teach them how to open up a Coke bottle. So the struggle is ours. This parenting struggle about managing and also fostering independence, that hybrid, and when the child is from 0 to 12, and of course, much easier when the child is a teenager, or you might say much harder because there's more at risk. The child has a car, child's out at night, child has more risks, more teens at risk, more friends doing wrong things. So I think the pressure on us to micromanage when they're little, to get it right and to make sure they're safe, and when they're teenagers, continues until they get married. And guess what? After they get married, also want to protect them as well. So a little bit less so when they get married. So we have to deal with that internal struggle of wanting to protect and also wanting to teach independence. What are the risks? The risks are that the child will become dependent on us for decisions, for confidence. So perhaps we can think about this idea. It is in our best interest to protect the child when they need protection, but also to teach them independence, to make their own decisions, because we want them to gain self-confidence. We want them to have a confidence and a resilience and ability to bounce back from defeat or disappointments. And we protect them from disappointments and from a B on a paper, which I'm doing, is not the right thing to do. And therefore, we have to teach them to get out in the world and handle it and learn from their own mistakes and write their own papers. And I think I'm going to take my own advice and I'm going to let them do their own papers from now on. As I'm speaking this out, it's very therapeutic for me. I want to thank you very much for this therapeutic lesson of being able to have a catharsis, let out my feelings about this thing. And I really appreciate this. How much do I owe you? So in any event, I think it's very helpful for me to learn this process. And I think for all of us to be able to learn that it's in our own best interest to be able to protect, at the same time to teach independence. And we can use some of these 6 techniques of how to foster independence and foster self-confidence and free will, that they have the right and opportunity and perhaps even obligation to use their own seichel, their own mind, their own intellect, their own choosing center, and make choices for themselves. And when they make a good choice, well done, praise them for it, well done. I'm sure you enjoy the consequences of the good result. And when they make a bad choice, say, well, what did you learn from that? But we have to allow them to make their own choices and their own mistakes so that they can learn and grow and become independent and therefore balanced human beings. Thanks for listening, and hope you can join us next Sunday night at 8:30 for the continuing program of Resilient Parenting. Good night.